John.
Hi, Betsy.
So you were talking the other day about reading the raw material and what seemed to be relevant from
Right.
that book, which was when was it written? Like in the
Yeah,
60s,
well,
70s?
Yeah, the raw material actually is a series of channeled interviews, and they took place in the 80s, early 80s, I think.
Hmm.
And the interviewer had a number of questions to ask Ra. Ra is from another dimension, sixth dimension, and his view on our reality is quite different than our own.
Mm.
And
But he's looking at it from a much broader perspective.
yeah,
right?
exactly. Considering that if we're in the third dimension,
Yeah.
and he's in the sixth, he's got these other three dimensions, and he's been trying to communicate with us a number of times over many, many years to help us. And because the way he puts it is, I respond to your call. So when we vibrate in a such certain way, and the vibration is one of asking for help, even if we're not consciously aware of it, but we're saying, I can't figure out what to do next. I'm really stuck here in this dimension, and I need help. And that call goes out as a vibration, and his beings in the sixth dimension, they resonate with it. It hits them, it vibrates them, and then they say to themselves, "Well, how can I help these guys? What kind of?"
Yeah, I think that just that very little point of asking for help is really very important, because if you think everything is self-contained and everything is happening just within your own little, parcel of understanding that you have, think of how limited,
Yeah.
an understanding can be, and remembering, I forget all the time
Yeah,
to ask for help.
Yes, and in a way, that's Ra's message almost. He's constantly trying to remind us that that we aren't exactly who we think we are. That we're actually beings that are connected by vibration, and that we're all connected, and we just live with this veil that exists, in our dimension, and not in all dimensions. But that veil really restricts what we understand about who we are.
What do you mean by veil?
What I mean is that, as he describes it, because one of the questions that the interviewer asked was, okay, were there beings here in the third dimension before the way we are now, in the sense that now we
like three-dimensional beings who feel separate from each other.
Yeah, exactly, the separateness, right. He says, is there a time when that separateness didn't exist? Is there a time when people didn't get born into this world without any information about where they came from? And he says, yes. He said that actually there was a time when the creator, in trying to understand him or herself better, had created third-dimensional beings, but without the veil. So that meant that those people still lived, they died, but the whole time they understood that they were connected, and that they had a heart connection to each other. So they didn't...
Not separate from God,
No.
or from all other expressions of God.
Yeah, that's right. But the thing that's interesting is that they still had to experience things. They would experience stuff. And in fact, one of the things he talked about is they tried to experience society, setting up societies. But they couldn't do it because they couldn't imagine it in a way that you had what do you call it? Like you had over others. Like you had
dominion or power.
Yeah, power over others, or dominion over others.
Yeah.
That didn't exist. So you had this society. They, because of their seeing the oneness, couldn't think of it that way. They couldn't think of how to have power over others, or how to...
So it didn't occur to them that could be an outcome because it was so much not part of their reality.
Yeah, exactly, because their reality didn't have the veil. You have to have the veil which makes everything separate,
Mm.
so that you can then think, I can have power
That
over
makes-
you.
yeah.
I can create a world
Yeah,
where
that's
you
right.
do my well, you do my bidding, because I
That's
understand
right.
that we're separate. Because we're separate, I can make you do
Yeah,
things for me.
I hear you. So what's the relevance to today?
Well, the relevance of today is that Ra would say, he would say that we keep thinking of ourselves and others. And he says, I have such a hard time thinking in the way that you guys do. He said, I have a hard time thinking of others. He said, I don't see any others. I only see all of you guys as being the same.
Mm.
And he said, so, it's like you constantly create this illusion, which is true. I mean, it's created for us. We were born into it that way. And according to him, part of the reason is because the Creator realized that the only way you could really understand as the Creator speaking, you could only understand your own nature is if you could totally forget it and then find it.
Remember.
Yes. So that's why we got to the point where you have to have, in order to make this experiment work, you have to have a veil, which means no memory of who you really are, in free will. Then the experiment is, what does it take? What does it take for any of us to begin to realize who we are, to begin to understand the depth of experience that we can really have, and use that to experience the Creator itself. Because we're still connected, we're still part of it. We never left that connection. We just left the thought of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so
it's like having your back turned to the sun.
yeah, exactly. And so we are here, in fact, I was just reading a little bit, and he was saying, the interviewer said, why did people, end up with such awful pain? Because they were talking about pain, and there's
Physical pain?
physical
or
pain.
Emotional.
It's both really, but he was saying that, in the third dimension without the veil, there was very little pain. And you could easily ignore it if you wanted to. But now, he said, I see people who are going through an awful pain. And Ra says, well, the reason is because they have chosen that pain because they are determined to understand who they are, and they don't care if they have to be hit on the head with a 2x4 as an experience to wake them up. So he says, it's just part of the whole, because at the same time, nobody changed. You could go further and you could say nobody dies. Because death is, again, part of the veil. It's part of the illusion. Because my source energy didn't go anyplace, regardless of whether I'm, in this dimension or not.
It's really hard, though, to
Yeah, I know. It's very hard.
wrap your head
Yeah.
around.
It is hard.
Because, compassion has to be there. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah, well, that's right.
no matter what a person's choice is.
I know. The good thing, though, is that when I talk about being part of the Creator, that means you're part of love. Because the irony is that, or if there is irony, that God actually, or Creator, source energy, is pure divine light and love. So the more you can experience that, the more you will bring that to everything, to each other, and that's why we need today to experience it more, because we need to bring that light and love. And probably what's happening in the world is all for that purpose. If our consciousness at some point was saying, as a unified consciousness, we need to get this sorted out so that we understand again who we are, then you could see where something happens, and do we go inside? Do we become passionate? Do we draw on what's already there? And if we did, we could understand who we are and make a better world.
Yeah. Well, that's
So much for today.
Well, that was fun.
Okay, let's cap it there.